Hmm? What? What? Oh yeah, Zizek won. I mean, seriously, that's all I really have to say about this debate. He lost. Now, you might not get that impression if you look at the centrists on YouTube. Um, they can be forgiven, sort of. You might get the impression that this was a very civil discussion where both sides ended up finding common ground and sitting down to debate. Now, I made this video because I wanted to tell you guys that's bullshit. And here's why. The core tenet of their points is that Zizek did not make a defense of Marxism. And that right there is a mistake that Jordan Peterson makes all throughout the entirety of the debate. Now, the problem with this perspective is that it portrays a fundamental ignorance with what Marxism actually is in academic circles. And that's both on the center's part, but most of all on Jordan Peterson's part. And I want you to go on a journey with me. It is a journey into the mind of Jordan Peterson. So, a couple months ago, you get called out, or at least you perceive that you get called out, by Zizek in an article. And Jordan Peterson, he's like, oh, yeah, another one of these post-modern Marxist, whatever that means. So, for some reason, because you're Jordan Peterson, you think that this ever so tiny slight is worth going on Twitter, and you at a random social media account that happens to have Zizek's name, and you challenge him to a debate. Now, Zizek doesn't have a Twitter, by the way. But Zizek does eventually respond to you, and he says, well, anytime, any place. So you're like, aha, gotcha. I got a real target right now. I got a leftist, perfect leftist to go after. And so you are perceiving in your head that, there's some kind of Marxist, communist-ish type, just sort of a really standard issue debate target for Jordan Peterson, who normally is on top of his game whenever he debates people. One thing that leftist YouTubers like to point out is that Jordan Peterson is very much like Ben Shapiro. He's very good at looking like he wins arguments. And that is because he usually is smart enough to pick targets who, number one, he can easily drive in any direction he wants. Just easily manipulate and control. Two, he always picks someone of a temperament that looks kind of irrational compared to him. He's very good at portraying himself as the more rational party. And so what he figures is that what I'm going to do is I am going to study the foundational text of Marxism. And I am going to dissect it line by line. And I am going to destroy his worldview on stage by going first, and therefore setting the conversation, and by just strawmanning out what his worldview is ahead of time, just defining for the audience what he believes. So he does this, and he goes to, okay, I still can't believe this. The Communist Manifesto. Like, that's what a high schooler reads to try to understand Marxism. You're using that to try to describe academic Marxism. Now, this shows you that Jordan Peterson isn't taking Zizek all that seriously at this moment. He's coming in with like the most basic understanding of Marxism and assumes that that's going to carry the day for him. And but most importantly, he makes a terrible assumption. That assumption is that Zizek is going to defend communism. But you might notice something, and we're going to get to that. He gets up on stage, and behind him is a banner, Capitalism versus Marxism. Now, he gets up there, he dissects the Communist Manifesto in his opening statement. You hear sometimes you hear some groans from the audience, you hear groans from inside your own skull because this is the dumbest thing you've ever seen him do. And so he sits down, he's rather smug about himself, he thinks he's destroyed communism right off the bat. And to some extent, he has. So Zizek comes up, and he starts reading from a transcript. Now, this isn't really professional looking, and at first I thought, oh man, he is so screwed. Like, Jordan Peterson, for all of his many faults, is really good at talking with his hands on stage, walking around, looking very majestic and cool and rational. And Zizek is sitting there with his transcript, lisping and stumbling over his words, and not sniffing this time. That's an improvement. But here is where things start to go off the rails a little bit for Peterson. And you see it in his face. He immediately has to start taking notes down, because Zizek starts to argue against capitalism and against the very movement that Jordan B. Peterson represents to the public. Now, Jordan Peterson, this entire time, looks flabbergasted because he came in here expecting to debate communism. And that's the moment he realizes something. You can see it on his face. He isn't debating communists. He's debating the very Marxists that he constantly goes on about in every single lecture he does now. He always goes on about cultural Marxists. And in the first half hour of this debate, he proved to everyone that he had no idea what he was talking about. Because he defines Marxism as communism. He conflates the two, instead of realizing that Marxism is basically anti-capitalist, modernist, Hegelian critiques. It is a grand theory of the world, that of which communism is just a political arm of. Now, Jordan B. Peterson is really in trouble at this point, but he doesn't entirely recognize it. He hasn't processed it yet. And as Zizek is going on, Zizek is honestly a little bit rambly at this point, but there is a definite purpose to everything he's saying. And because he's reading off the transcript, you know that when he walked into this debate, he was playing to win. Because he rightfully somehow predicted that Peterson would do exactly what Peterson did, and decided to go off kilter from where Peterson was comfortable. Peterson had all his talking points ready for him to go smash communism. And now he is in an academic debate about Marxism. And so when Zizek's done, Peterson gets on stage. And he's like, but I didn't hear a defense of Marxism, just anti-capitalism. And I start giggling at this point because I'm like, that's what Marxism is. And it astounded me because it showed me, and I've suspected this for so long, but finally I have video evidence that Jordan Peterson has zero idea what a Marxist is. And he just continues to show that. He aims to be absolutely frightened because he came to this debate called capitalism versus Marxism. And Zizek has actually defended Marxism here, even though Peterson, unfortunately, is too ignorant to know that he's done that. So Peterson, however, is in an uncomfortable position because he has to defend capitalism now, and Jordan B. Peterson, for all of his faults, I don't believe he actually thinks capitalism is a morally good system. He thinks it's a lesser evilism kind of thing, which is, it's still kind of dumb, but you can see that he is so uncomfortable defending a system that is based on avarice and envy. He is also very uncomfortable with the fact that Zizek brought up power hierarchies and sort of debunked Jordan Peterson's points about power hierarchies. And so Peterson is left in this awkward position where he's being forced to defend things he doesn't really believe in, which, I guess that's not really new for Jordan Peterson, but anyways. So, Peterson at this point is on the back pedal, and he's just rambling on and on, and at some point he tries to bring up how bad communism is, and he's glad that Zizek has agreed to this premise. Not realizing that Zizek really didn't do anything of the sort, but Zizek doesn't correct him because he has an agenda here. Now, Peterson ends his 10-minute ramble, and Zizek comes, and he has already sort of forced Jordan Peterson to find some common ground. And so Peterson, at this point, is back on the defensive because Zizek actually begins to get off transcript and sort of discuss all the things that Jordan and Peterson said in his opening statement. He points out the obvious things, like, why are you going to the Communist Manifesto on a discussion for academic Marxism? Why are you going to a pamphlet that's literally 23 pages long and expecting it to have all the nuances of the academic theory that it sort of represents? It was written for factory workers in the 19th century with the hope that they would overthrow the capitalists. It's not that detailed. And I will say, Marx doesn't have a ton of detail about some of the mechanisms, but Jordan Peterson fundamentally misunderstands concepts like vanguard parties and dictatorship of the proletariat. He assumes that those things are the same thing, and doesn't realize all the various directions that the left could have taken any given socialist, communist, syndicalist, anarchist revolution. And so Zizek is just calling him out on all the ignorance displayed, but he's also doing something else. He's trying to appeal to Jordan Peterson's base, and that is he's trying to distance himself from the liberals. Because, and in case you don't know, liberals aren't socialists, and socialists aren't liberals, and they're very likely to kill each other one day. Anyways, So, where were we? Yes. Communism. Now, he starts continuing on his train of anti-capitalism, and by the end of it, Jordan Peterson is just leaning so far in his seat, trying to figure stuff out. And when they sit down together at the end, Jordan Peterson, his talking points are extinguished, and he can't talk. And he is at least smart enough to know that his talking points are now utterly irrelevant. There's no relevance to any of his talking points. And he is just left saying, well, I just have a few questions. Why? You clearly don't sound like a Marxist. So, and you clearly have like an original, unique ideology. Sort of. I guess, in real life, but whatever. Why are you attaching yourself to this 180-year-old old philosophy? And especially when it seems like you seem to disagree with it in so many places. And Zizek, right here, is already having already basically won this debate from the first two, admittedly rambly segments. Decides to throw Peterson a bone, and he invokes Hegel. This is the point. Now, full disclosure here. In outside of this debate, I have some biases. Now, unfortunately for both of them, these biases are against both of them. And I'm not saying this from a centrist perspective. I just think they're both kind of assholes. Oh, that's moralizing. I don't want to say it to sound like that, man. No. What I really mean by that is that Jordan Peterson is a somewhat ignorant ideologue who hasn't really engaged with any ideas outside of his own narrow sphere of classical liberalism-esque beliefs. And he has spent the last couple years of his career deliberately not engaging with people who believe different things from him. Now, Zizek has done this, and I'm going to say I don't like Zizek for a number of reasons. I think he's very divisive for the left as a whole in an era where we really need to have complete solidarity together as much as possible. Now, I understand that this is going to be a little bit hard for some of us. Some of us leftists don't really get along all that well. So, I don't find that his particular brand of, political incorrectness that's a terrible impression, is actually contributing to the conversation all that much. Or at least I didn't think that. After this, I actually do have a little bit of respect for where he's coming from. And I think that he is a useful asset in that way. Zizek and Peterson at this point are having a discussion. And Zizek starts to call Peterson out on a bunch of bullshit. He uses one question, which is, alright, you keep saying these words, and I know what you mean by them, which I appreciate, that he wasn't going to play semantics with Peterson, because literally everyone who isn't, stupid knows that you can't be a postmodern neo-Marxist. It's literally impossible to believe that you have the end-all objective worldview, Marxism, and be someone who believes that there is no such thing as a completely objective worldview that is completely coherent. You can't be both. So, he doesn't go that direction. He could have, but he didn't. He didn't decide not to waste anyone's time, like I just did for you guys. But instead, he says, "So tell me who these Marxists are." And Jordan Peterson, at this point, he looks nervous again. And the reason why is becomes very, very obvious. Because he asked for names, and immediately Jordan Peterson starts naming statistics. Like, a large number of college professors identify as Marxists. And then Zizek says, who? And names some Marxists. And Jordan Peterson tries to also, despite the fact that Zizek didn't mention it, tries his best to try to reconcile Hegelian objective Marxism with postmodernism, and it gives me life. But yes, things get pretty interesting there for a second. And then Zizek, at this point, has perceived that he's won the argument, and now he wants to do something for Peterson, because Peterson is confused, because he's been forced for the first time, maybe in his entire life, to engage with Marxists and find out that, at heart, he sort of agrees with them in many key aspects of their philosophy. And he's uncomfortable with this, you can tell. Zizek, on the other hand, knows just about everything he agrees with Jordan Peterson. In fact, it's very obvious because he has this sort of agenda where he brings them up strategically throughout the debate. Now, this is also where things get interesting again. Things pick up. He starts trying to really find common ground with Peterson. And he's doing something here because, in fact, he's not doing this for Peterson. Let's be honest. I mean, they might become friends after this, but that's not really what was happening here. What was happening was he was looking at Peterson's audience and saying, listen, the left is something different than what you think it is. Marxists are different from what you think they are. And he gets Jordan Peterson into the real core difference between Peterson and Zizek. And that is that, at heart, the big bias in all of Peterson's work is that that changing yourself as an individual should come first at all times, and only then should you start to try to affect society. And Zizek says, very simply, and it's a very good point, you need to be doing both, because the problems with you are not unique to you. A lot of the problems that you will experience and are indeed your own personal responsibility. Yes, you have to engage with them. But the most important thing you have to remember is that I'm going to say it, aren't I? We live in a society. Yeah, but we live in groups. We aren't islands. We have to, and in changing our own behavior, a lot of that is actually also going to have to come down to changing the behavior of society as a whole. Or changing the systems of it that cause some of us people to go down paths that they shouldn't be going down. And so, Peterson at this point is just insistent that people are evil, but that focusing on yourself as an individual, you'll be able to solve your own problems and perhaps eventually society's problems. But now he is genuinely interested in trying to get Peterson to engage with the conversation. And he does this in a really interesting way. He starts looking at their common interests. Unfortunately, Jordan Peterson is not as well read as he thinks he is, and so a lot of the things that that our good friend Zizek was going over were just flying right over Peterson's head. Now, that's not entirely his fault, although I am absolutely shocked that he didn't know anything about G.K. Chesterton. Like, people always say that Marxists hate the Western canon, but it's so sad that the person bringing up G.K. Chesterton at a Jordan Peterson versus Zizek event was Zizek. And so you have this moment where he is just outclassing Peterson on every front. He knows Marxism better. He knows capitalism better. He doesn't necessarily know psychology better, but he knows his philosophy better. He knows the basis behind it. He knows his Hegel. He knows Kierkegaard. And then we got to G.K. Chesterton. I'm like, is this guy a Marxist? And I remember, oh wait, yes he is. I just keep listening to idiots like Jordan Peterson. Now, Peterson, at this point, though, is interested. He's really fascinated that he is having this discussion, and that he's been forced by having all of his talking points stripped away from him to talk to Zizek like he's a person. Like he's a peer. And it was actually kind of touching. And it also shows you something, though. Because I think this is another thing that Zizek was trying to point out to the alt-right. And what he sort of is about in general. He's a gateway drug. He is about trying to get you, edgy teenager you are, to figure out that the core complaints of right-wing political philosophies all sort of stem from the same place. In fact, the reason why he brings back up Hegel so much, and I know this is why he's doing it, he knows who's watching. Because it turns out there's a certain other monolithic set of ideologies that likes Hegel a lot, and that's them. This is the part where Zizek is really trying to show Peterson's audience and Peterson himself that all of their energy is misplaced. Their ideas actually do not diverge all that much from the left in like the core belief that society is not healthy right now, that there is something wrong, something degenerate about it. The problem is that they misdirect all of their energy towards combating progressives, SJWs, liberals, towards immigrants, towards Jews, towards black people. And they never really have realized that they've been pushed this direction by the capitalists. They've been shoved this direction because the people in power want the focus of the right to be focused on the people who are the biggest threats to the capitalist order, the easiest scapegoats, the minorities. And so that's whenever people say, Zizek didn't win this, Zizek won this. Not by defending communism, not by necessarily even defeating capitalism, but by showing the right that their concerns are valid and shared, but they have completely missed the mark on who to blame. And they have the wrong praxis for dealing with it. And by the end, Peterson looks really thoughtful about all of this, and I can only hope that he keeps in contact with Zizek, and Zizek can push him further and further left. Now, I don't expect Jordan Peterson to become, like, a communist, an anarchist, or a socialist, even though, funnily enough, I think he would be better off as an anarchist than anything else. But anyways. So how do we beat Peterson? And Zizek has shown us this. You don't do it by just posturing. You don't do it by facts and logic, necessarily. Like, there's very little facts and acts and logic here. That's not what we're here for. Was that Zizek really wanted to force Jordan Peterson to engage. The way you beat him is to get him off his script. You need to unbalance him. You need to make him understand your perspective and make him engage with your perspective. And but you can't. And the best way to do that is to sort of start off like acting he didn't say anything, and just shoving him as far in the direction you want him to as possible. And Zizek just beautifully danced around him. Okay, that's a lie. He tripped around him a bunch, like in a really awkward, like, chicken dance. But anyways, point of the matter is, Zizek won.